Why do you keep that part between your legs, covered human? An alien girl's curious encounter. The crystalline dome of Outpost Lumina glittered under the light of 3 moons, casting prismatic shadows across the research facility nestled in the lush valley. Dr. Lyra Novak adjusted her standard-issue uniform for the 5th time that hour, an unnecessary habit born of nervousness rather than discomfort. Today marked the arrival of the Ceridian delegation, and as the outpost's lead xenolinguist, first impressions fell squarely on her shoulders. "Your heart rate has increased by 17%, Dr. Novak," chimed the outpost's AI from a nearby console. "Would you like a mild sedative?" "No, thank you," Lyra replied, brushing a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Healthy anxiety keeps us sharp." The airlock doors parted with a soft hiss, and Captain Emerson strode in, his weathered face set in its usual stoic expression. "They've docked. Remember, the Ceridians are our most promising allies in this sector. Don't mess this up." Lyra resisted, the urge to roll her eyes. After 3 years decoding the complex tonal language of the aquatic Mirkai, she hardly needed reminding of diplomatic protocol. "I've memorized all 17 volumes of their cultural guidelines, Captain." The station trembled slightly as the Ceridian shuttle completed its docking procedures. Minutes later, the inner doors slid open, revealing their visitors. Lyra had studied holographic representations of Ceridians extensively, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. Leading the small delegation was a tall figure who immediately commanded attention. His skin shimmered with a subtle iridescence, shifting between deep blue and violet tones that caught the light with every movement. 2 large almond-shaped eyes regarded the humans with keen intelligence, their irises swirling with amber and gold flecks that seemed almost luminous. Most striking was how the Ceridian wore what humans might consider minimal attire, a sleeveless tunic that exposed much of his chest and arms, and fitted lower garments that ended mid-thigh, revealing long, graceful limbs. Ornate patterns adorned his exposed skin, either tattoos or natural markings. Lyra couldn't tell. "Welcome to Outpost Lumina," Captain Emerson said, stepping forward with a formal bow. "I am Captain Emerson, and this is Dr. Lyra Novak, our xenolinguistic specialist." The lead Ceridian inclined his head, a gesture Lyra recognized as respectful acknowledgement. When he spoke, his voice carried a melodic quality that made the translator sound almost musical. "I am Thalen, appointed diplomat of the Ceridian Confluence. We bring greetings and the promise of mutual understanding." His gaze settled on Lyra, unwavering and curious. "You are the one who deciphered our written language without a reference key." "Impressive." Lyra felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Pattern. Recognition is my specialty, but your language has beautiful mathematical properties that made the work enjoyable." A slight curve appeared at the corners of Thalen's mouth. "Mathematics and beauty, the foundational elements of the universe, according to our philosophers." Captain Emerson cleared his throat. "Dr. Novak will show you to your quarters and brief you on our research facilities. We've adjusted environmental controls to Ceridian preferences." "Most considerate," Thalen said, though his attention remained fixed on Lyra. As they walked through the station's corridors, Lyra noticed how other crew members reacted to Thalen's presence. Quick glances, hushed whispers. The Ceridians were the first humanoid species humans had encountered with compatible atmospheric requirements, making them ideal partners for the Lumina Research Initiative. Yet their physiological differences still provoked curiosity. "Your colleagues seem fascinated by us," Thalen observed, his tone neutral. "Humans are naturally curious about new experiences," Lyra replied diplomatically. "And your people are distinctive, as are yours." His eyes tracked a passing technician whose uniform covered nearly every inch of skin. "Your coverings are elaborate for protection?" "Sometimes," Lyra answered, suddenly aware of how fully clothed she was compared to him. "But mostly for cultural reasons. Modesty, identity, status. Clothing communicates many things for humans." Thalen nodded thoughtfully. "Among Ceridians, our markings serve that purpose. They tell our lineage, accomplishments, even emotional states." He gestured to a swirling pattern across his exposed shoulder. "This indicates my diplomatic status." They reached the guest quarters, a spacious suite overlooking the moonlit forests of Lumina. Thalen moved to the viewport, his profile striking against the backdrop of alien wilderness. "We will work closely together in the coming months, Doctor." "Novak," he said, turning to face her, "I hope we might move beyond mere translation to true understanding." "That's my hope as well," Lyra replied, finding herself genuinely eager for the challenge ahead. "And please call me Lyra." "Lyra," he repeated, the name taking on a musical quality in his voice. "I look forward to learning what lies beneath your careful words and many layers." The statement held no judgment, only sincere curiosity, yet Lyra felt herself blushing again. As she left Thalen to settle in, she couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead in this unprecedented cultural exchange, and why the simple mention of layers had made her heart rate spike far more than 17%. The research lab hummed with activity as Lyra calibrated the holographic interface, adjusting parameters to accommodate both human and Ceridian vision spectrums. 2 weeks into the joint mission, the initial awkwardness had settled into a productive rhythm, though not without its complications. "The phonetic mapping is complete," Lyra announced, stepping back from the console. "We should be able to analyze regional dialects with 87% accuracy now." Thalen approached the display, his movements fluid and deliberate. In the artificial light, the patterns across his exposed skin seemed to pulse subtly with his breathing. "Remarkable progress. Your algorithm recognizes tonal variations I hadn't considered significant." "Language reveals more than we intend," Lyra replied, trying to maintain professional focus despite her growing awareness of his proximity. "Subtle inflections often carry unconscious cultural biases." "Like clothing?" Thalen asked, his amber-flecked eyes meeting hers with that now familiar directness. Lyra hesitated. "That's an interesting comparison." Dr. Julian Frost, the station's exobiologist, entered the lab with a stack of data tablets. He paused, his gaze flickering between Lyra and Thalen before clearing his throat. "Sorry to interrupt. The botanical samples from the northern basin show some promising medicinal properties. Thought you might want to include them in the cultural exchange database." "Excellent," Lyra said, grateful for the interruption. Thalen was explaining Ceridian, linguistic markers. "Actually," Thalen corrected gently, "we were discussing human attire conventions. They remain puzzling." He gestured toward Julian's lab coat. "This indicates your scientific role, correct? But why cover the body so completely in a climate-controlled environment?" Julian's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Standard. Protocol. Prevents contamination and maintains professionalism." "Interesting," Thalen mused. "On Ceridia, concealment suggests shame or deception. Openness is valued both in communication and appearance." An uncomfortable silence settled over the lab. Julian placed the tablets on a nearby counter. "I should check on those cultures. Dr. Novak, the department head's meeting is at 1800 hours. With a curt nod, he departed. Lyra sighed. "I apologize for Dr. Frost. He's brilliant but sometimes rigid in his thinking." Thalen tilted his head. A gesture she'd learned indicated contemplation. "No apology necessary. Cultural dissonance is expected." He moved to the viewport overlooking Lumina's twilight landscape. "Perhaps that's why we're both here, to navigate these misunderstandings." Later that evening, after the department meeting, Lyra found herself in the station's hydroponics garden. The artificial day cycle had dimmed, leaving the plants bathed in soft blue light that mimicked Lumina's longest moon. She often came here to think, finding the gentle rustle of leaves soothing after hours of complex translations. "May I join you?" Thalen's voice came from the entrance, startling her slightly. "Of course," she replied, motioning to the bench beside her. He sat, his eyes reflecting the blue illumination in a way that made them seem to glow from within. For several minutes, they observed the simulated evening in companionable silence. "Fear I caused discomfort earlier," Thalen finally said. "It wasn't my intention." Lyra shook her head. "Cultural exchange includes uncomfortable moments. It's how we learn. On Ceridia, we have a concept called shavelin, the necessary pain of growth." His fingers traced one of the patterns on his arm. "These markings, each represents a lesson learned, often through difficulty. That's not so different from humans, Lyra said. We just tend to keep our scars, emotional and physical, covered. Thailand considered this. Your coverings, they're not simply about modesty, are they? They're protective, barriers against vulnerability. The observation struck closer to home than Lyra was comfortable admitting. Sometimes protection is necessary, she said quietly. Against what? Judgment, rejection, misinterpretation. She gestured vaguely. Human bodies are complicated territory. We're taught from childhood that certain parts are private, intimate. Like the areas between your legs that you keep most carefully concealed? Thailand asked, his tone purely academic. Lyra felt heat flood her face. Yes, those areas especially. Because they're reproductive organs. Partly, she managed, but also because they're associated with pleasure, intimacy. Exposing them suggests availability, in a way. Thalen nodded, slowly. Caridians view reproductive organs as natural conduits of life energy, neither shameful nor particularly sacred, simply part of our whole being. He paused. Though we do reserve intimate touch for meaningful connections. The conversation was venturing into territory that made Lyra's professional boundaries waver. She stood abruptly. It's getting late. I should review tomorrow's translation matrices. Thalen rose as well, towering slightly above her. Have I caused offense again? No, Lyra assured him, softening her tone. These are just sensitive topics for humans. Sensitivity suggests importance, Thalen observed. Perhaps these are precisely the areas of understanding we should explore, rather than avoid. Before Lyra could formulate a response, the station's alert system chimed softly. Captain Emerson's voice came through the comm system. All research personnel, report to Conference Room Alpha for emergency briefing. Repeat, all research personnel, to Conference Room Alpha. They exchanged concerned glances. That doesn't sound routine, Lyra said. No, Thalen agreed, his expression growing serious. It does not. As they hurried toward the conference room, Lyra was acutely aware of the growing complexity of their relationship. Professional, cultural, and something else she wasn't ready to name. Whatever emergency awaited them would have to be addressed. First, but she knew their unfinished conversation lingered between them, a bridge partially constructed across a widening cultural divide. The holographic display in Conference Room Alpha showed a swirling atmospheric disturbance approaching from Lumina's eastern hemisphere. Captain Emerson's face remained impassive as he addressed the assembled team. A Category 4 ionic storm will hit our region in approximately 15 hours, he announced. Most station operations will continue under storm protocols, but there's a complication. He nodded to Dr. Frost, who stepped forward. The automated sample collection units in Sector 7 are still deployed, Julian explained, bringing up a map of the valley. They contain 3 months of irreplaceable biometric data. If we don't retrieve them before the storm hits, they'll be destroyed. Why not send drones? Asked one of the junior researchers. The pre-storm ionic interference is already disrupting remote signals, Julian replied. This requires a manual retrieval. Captain Emerson surveyed the room. I need 2 volunteers familiar with both the collection units and the terrain. I'll go, Lyra said immediately. Having helped program the linguistic analysis components of the units, she knew their systems intimately. As will I, Thalen added. The collection site contains several Ceridian biomarkers we contributed. I have the necessary expertise. Julian frowned. The atmospheric conditions will be challenging, especially for someone not acclimated to Lumina's environment. My physiology is well suited to ionic fluctuations, Thalen countered. In fact, Ceridians evolved in similar conditions, Captain So. Emerson considered briefly before nodding. Approved. Depart at 600 hours. Full environmental gear is mandatory. Be back before the storm front arrives. As the meeting dispersed, Julian approached Lyra. Are you sure about this? Thalen is still adjusting to our operations. He's more than proven his adaptability, Lyra replied, perhaps more defensively than intended. And his knowledge of Ceridian biomarkers is essential. Julian's expression softened slightly. Just be careful. These storms are unpredictable. The Next morning, Lyra met Thalen at the transport bay. He was already examining their expedition gear, his usual minimal attire replaced by a form-fitting environmental suit designed for Ceridian physiology. The sight was oddly disorienting. After weeks of seeing him with skin exposed, the coverage seemed almost unnatural. "Good morning," she greeted him, beginning her pre-expedition checklist. "How does the suit feel?" "Restrictive," he admitted, flexing his shoulders, "but functional. Is this how you feel in your daily attire?" Lyra smiled despite herself. "You get used to it." They loaded the final equipment into the terrain vehicle and departed through the station's eastern airlock. Outside, Lumina's landscape stretched before them, a tapestry of violet vegetation and crystalline rock formations under a sky already darkening with the approaching storm. The vehicle hummed across the uneven terrain, its stabilizers compensating for the increasingly erratic gravitational fluctuations. "The collection units should be just beyond that ridge," Lyra said, checking the navigation system. "We're making good time." Thalen studied the horizon, where energy discharges illuminated the gathering clouds. "The storm is accelerating. We should hurry." They reached the collection site, a small clearing surrounded by towering, purple-leafed trees whose branches twisted skyward like reaching fingers. The collection units, silver cylinders half embedded in the soil, pulsed with dim lights indicating active status. Working quickly, they began disconnecting the units from their moorings. The air grew thick with charged particles, causing the hairs on Lyra's arms to stand on end even beneath her suit. "The final unit is malfunctioning," Thalen called over the rising wind. "The extraction sequence is locked." Lyra joined him, examining the unit's control panel. "The ionic interference must be affecting its circuits. I'll need to bypass the main processor." As she worked, a brilliant flash split the sky, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack. The ground beneath them shuddered. One of the massive trees struck by the energy discharge began to topple directly toward them. "Look out!" Thalen shouted, lunging toward Lyra. His body collided with hers, sending them both rolling clear as the tree crashed down, crushing the remaining collection unit in a shower of sparks and splintered metal. They came to a stop several meters away, Thalen's body protectively curved over Lyra's. For a moment they remained frozen, hearts racing in synchronized fear. Lyra became acutely aware of their proximity, the pressure of his body against hers, separated only by the layers of their environmental suits. "Are you injured?" he asked, his voice strained as he carefully shifted his weight. "I don't think so," she managed, taking inventory of her limbs. "You?" "Functional," he replied, helping her to her feet. "But we have a problem. The terrain vehicle was partially crushed beneath. Another fallen branch, its propulsion system clearly damaged. Worse, the sky had transformed into a roiling mass of violet and black clouds, energy discharges connecting heaven and earth in jagged patterns. We won't make it back before the storm hits," Lyra realized, a spike of fear shooting through her. Thalen scanned their surroundings. "There," he pointed to a formation of crystalline rocks jutting from the hillside. "Those formations often contain natural caverns. We might find shelter." With the remaining collection units secured in their packs, they made their way toward the rock formation as the storm intensified around them. The entrance to the cavern was narrow, but opened into a surprisingly spacious chamber, its walls embedded, with luminescent minerals that cast a soft blue glow. "The crystal composition should provide some protection from the ionic discharges," Thalen said, examining their shelter as Lyra activated their emergency beacon. "Signals not getting through," she reported. "We'll have to wait out the storm." If in response, a tremendous boom echoed outside, and the ground trembled beneath them. Instinctively they moved deeper into the cavern, away from the howling winds that whipped past the entrance. "At least we retrieved most of the units," Lyra said, trying to sound optimistic as she checked their supplies. "Emergency rations, water purifiers, basic medical kit. We're equipped for a night, if necessary." Thalen nodded, then began unfastening the seals of his environmental suit. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked, startled. "The suit's respiratory system was damaged in our fall," he explained. "It's recycling carbon dioxide rather than filtering it. In this enclosed space, it's more dangerous. To keep it on." As he removed the outer layer, Lyra saw a jagged tear across the back panel, likely from their narrow escape. Beneath the suit, he wore only a thin underlayer that clung to his form, revealing the full extent of the patterns that adorned his body. In the blue mineral light, they seemed to pulse with an internal rhythm. "Your turn," he said, noticing her stare. "My suit's functioning properly," she replied quickly, "but your shoulder is bleeding." Lyra looked down in surprise to see a dark stain spreading across her left shoulder. The fabric had been punctured, likely by debris during their fall. Now that her attention was drawn to it, the area began to throb painfully. "That needs treatment," Thalen said firmly, "and I cannot properly assess it through your suit." Reluctantly, Lyra began removing her outer gear, wincing as the fabric pulled away from the wound. Beneath, she wore the standard-issue base layer, a fitted thermal garment that covered her from neck to ankles, but left little to the imagination regarding her physical form. If Thalen noticed her discomfort, he gave no indication. His focus remained clinical as he examined the gash on her shoulder. "Not deep, but it needs cleaning," he said, reaching for the medical kit. With gentle efficiency, he cleansed and sealed the wound, his fingers warm against her skin. "Thank you," Lyra said when he finished, "for this and for saving me from the falling tree." Thalen met her eyes, the amber flecks in his irises particularly vivid in the cavern's blue light. "We protect what we value," he said simply. Outside, the storm raged on, but within their crystalline shelter, a different kind of tension began to build, one that had little to do with ionic discharges and everything to do with barriers slowly crumbling away. The research station buzzed with unusual activity. 6 weeks had passed since the storm, and the Ceridian delegation's scheduled departure loomed just days away. In the main laboratory, Lyra finalized the comprehensive linguistic database, the culmination of their joint mission. "The adaptive algorithm exceeds our original specifications," she explained to Captain Emerson and the project leaders gathered around the display. "It doesn't just translate between our languages, it contextualizes cultural nuances in real time." "An impressive achievement," Captain Emerson acknowledged. "This technology will serve as the foundation for human-Ceridian relations moving forward." From across the room, Lyra caught Thalen's gaze. A slight smile played across his features, one she had learned to recognize as pride mingled with something more personal. Since their night in the cavern, a subtle shift had occurred in their interactions, professional collaboration deepening into a connection neither had anticipated. As the meeting dispersed, Dr. Frost approached her workstation. "The Ceridian High Council has requested complete copies of our research," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "They're sending a diplomatic vessel to escort their delegation home." "That's standard protocol," Lyra replied, continuing her work. Julian hesitated before adding, "There are rumors they're considering limiting future exchange programs. Apparently, some council members believe too much cultural integration poses risks." Lyra's hand stilled over the console. "Where did you hear that?" "Communication logs. I was updating the medical exchange protocols when I noticed the diplomatic transmissions had increased threefold." He lowered his voice. "You and Thalen have become close. If there's anything that might compromise my relationship with—" "The Ceridian delegation is entirely professional," Lyra interrupted, the statement feeling hollow even as she spoke it. Julian's expression softened unexpectedly. "Lyra, I'm not your superior or the station's moral authority. I'm saying this as someone who respects your work. Be careful. Cross-species connections are uncharted territory." After he left, Lyra remained at her station, his warning echoing in her mind. That evening, she found herself once again in the hydroponics garden, seeking solace among the familiar plants. This time, she was not surprised when Thalen joined. "Your colleague Dr. Frost spoke with me today," he said without preamble, "about the Ceridian Council's concerns regarding our mission." Thalen sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "They believe I have become too immersed in human culture, that my objectivity is compromised." "Is it?" Lyra asked quietly. Thalen was silent for a moment. "Objectivity assumes separation, observer and observed. I no longer believe such separation is possible or desirable. His eyes met hers. The Council has asked me to return with specific recommendations about limiting future interactions. And what will you recommend? That depends on what awaits me on Ceridia. He turned more fully toward her. And what remains for me here? The implication hung between them, weightier than any gravity. Lyra found herself at a crossroads she had never anticipated when accepting this assignment. I've requested a long-term position with the Xenolinguistics Division on Ceridia, she said, the decision crystallizing as she spoke it. If they'll have me. Surprise and something like hope flickered across Thalen's features. That would be unprecedented. No human has lived among Ceridians before. Someone has to be first, Lyra replied. The linguistic database is complete, but true understanding, that work has barely begun. The physiological differences, the cultural adjustments, they would be significant, Thalen cautioned, though she could hear the undercurrent of excitement in his voice. I've been studying Ceridian environmental requirements, Lyra admitted. Your atmospheric composition is within human tolerance ranges. The gravitational difference would require adaptation, but nothing insurmountable. She paused. Unless you believe I wouldn't be welcome. You would be welcome by me, Thalen said, his directness both startling and familiar now. But the Council would benefit from direct human interaction rather than filtered reports, Lyra finished. If they're concerned about cultural contamination, shouldn't they study the process firsthand, under controlled conditions? A slow smile spread across Thalen's face. You've already prepared your proposal, haven't you? Complete with research parameters and expected outcomes, Lyra confirmed, returning his smile. I am a scientist, after all. Indeed. Thalen reached out, his fingers lightly touching the back of her hand, a gesture that had become their private language. But we both know this proposal isn't purely academic. No, Lyra acknowledged, turning her palm upward to meet his. It isn't. The following days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Captain Emerson was surprisingly supportive of Lyra's proposal, seeing the diplomatic advantages of having a human representative directly embedded in Ceridian society. The Ceridian Council, after initial resistance, provisionally approved a one-year research position, with the understanding that Lyra would document the cultural integration process extensively. On the morning of departure, Lyra stood in her quarters, surveying the few possessions she would take to her new home. Most of her belongings would remain in storage at the station, artifacts of a life she was temporarily leaving behind. She had just sealed her final case when her door chimed. Come in, she called, expecting a station technician with departure. Instructions. Instead, Dr. Julian Frost entered, carrying a small package wrapped in iridescent material. A parting gift, he explained, handing it to her, and an apology. I may have been overly concerned about your connection with Thalen. Surprised, Lyra carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small device. A personal atmospheric regulator, Julian explained. I modified it based on Ceridian environmental data. It should help with the transition. Thank you, Lyra said, genuinely touched by the gesture. That's incredibly thoughtful. Julian nodded awkwardly. For what it's worth, I think you're making a brave choice. Uncomfortable boundaries are where the most important discoveries happen. He offered a rare smile. Just promise to send detailed research notes. The xenobiology implications alone are fascinating. I'll remember that, Lyra laughed, appreciating his attempt to frame her personal journey in scientific terms. Later, as the Ceridian vessel prepared for departure, Lyra stood at the airlock alongside Thalen. Captain Emerson and a small contingent of station personnel had gathered to see them off. Represent humanity well, Dr. Novak, Emerson said formally, then added with uncharacteristic warmth, and take care of yourself, Lyra. I will, she promised, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of her decision. As they boarded the vessel, Thalen led her to a viewport where they could watch the research station recede as they departed. Lumina's 3 moons hung in perfect alignment above the horizon, a rare astronomical event the station's scientists had dubbed the Convergence. In Ceridian tradition, 3 aligned celestial bodies symbolize paths merging, Thalen explained, standing close beside her. A fortuitous omen for new beginnings. Lyra felt a momentary trepidation as the station grew smaller, her familiar world literally diminishing before her eyes. Yet beside her stood a once alien being who now felt more familiar than strange, a bridge between worlds embodied in iridescent skin and thoughtful eyes. "I should warn you," she said, finding comfort in humor. "I have a lot of questions about Ceridian culture that didn't make it into the official research parameters." "Such as?" Thalen prompted, amusement evident in his voice. "Well, for starters, I'm still curious about those markings that appear during emotional changes. Are they sensitive to touch? Do they serve any physiological function besides communication? Are there particular patterns considered especially beautiful or significant?" Thalen laughed, the sound musical and warming. "Your curiosity is boundless, Lyra Novak." His expression grew more serious, though his eyes remained warm. "On Ceridia, you will be the one whose form is different, whose coverings might seem strange. Are you prepared for that perspective?" Lyra considered the question carefully. After a lifetime of feeling awkward in her own skin, of using clothing as armor against vulnerability, the prospect of being visibly, unavoidably different was both terrifying and strangely liberating. "I think," she said slowly, "that being the obvious outsider might be easier than pretending to fit in. At least there's honesty and acknowledged difference." Thalen's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that bridged their physiological differences. "Among my people, there is a saying, truth lives in the space between understanding and mystery. I believe our journey together will honor both." As the ship accelerated toward the stars, Lyra felt not the anxiety of leaving the familiar behind, but the exhilaration of moving toward something authentic and unexplored. Whatever awaited her on Ceridia, cultural misunderstandings, biological challenges, the scrutiny of being the first human in their midst, she would face it with the same curiosity and courage that had drawn her to the stars in the first place. And she would face it with Thalen beside her, two beings from different worlds who had discovered that beneath their external differences lay a shared capacity for growth, vulnerability, and connection that transcended the boundaries of species. In the end, perhaps that was the most valuable discovery of all.